Story 1. The VIP room. I still think about the mirror behind that bar. Not because it was antique or expensive looking, even though it was. I think about it because it let me see all three of them without turning around. Three older guys at the bar, all far enough apart that they looked unrelated. None of them talking, none of them even facing me directly. But every few seconds I could see their eyes land on my booth in the glass behind the liquor bottles. My date had already been gone 20 minutes by then, supposedly in the restroom. My phone had no signal. Their whiskey was still sweating on the table. And I remember thinking, in this stupid tiny hopeful way, that I was probably just being weird because I'd only been in the city a month and everything still felt louder and stranger underground. My name's Talia, and at the time I was 23, brand new to the city, living in a fourth floor walk-up off Hester Street with two roommates I barely knew yet. I relied on maps for everything. Coffee shop, pharmacy, laundromat, it didn't matter. If my phone died, I was basically a tourist again. I'd been talking to this guy on a dating app for about 3 weeks. He seemed normal, funny in a dry way, always texting back at reasonable hours, never pushy. He suggested a speakeasy on the Lower East Side, one of those basement places with no sign, just a brass plate by a narrow staircase. I got there first, awkwardly early, ordered a water because I didn't want to start drinking alone, and told myself it was a good sign that the place felt expensive and quiet instead of sketchy. The first thing that bothered me wasn't even something he did. It was what happened when he arrived. He came down the stairs smiling like we'd already known each other in person for years, hugged me lightly, sat down, and before he could say a word, the bartender crossed the room and handed him a black menu. Not the regular cream-colored one on our table. A different one, matte black, no logo, no prices that I could see from where I sat. Nobody else had one. I remember the smell in that room right then, sweet cigar smoke and that hot metal smell like an outlet overheating behind a wall. He didn't react like it was strange, so I smiled and pretended it wasn't strange either. I figured he was a regular or a member, or one of those people who always know hidden places and get treated like they're important. I told myself that was all it was. Cities run on invisible little hierarchies. Everybody already knows somewhere you don't. That's not a threat, that's just being new. He was relaxed, the bartender was relaxed. Nobody else in the room looked alarmed. I remember actually feeling embarrassed that my brain had snagged on the menu at all. I didn't want to be the girl who came from a smaller town and saw a conspiracy in bottle service. So I drank my water, asked him about his job, laughed when it made sense to laugh, and tried to settle into the booth. But even then there was this tiny problem I couldn't phrase. The heavy velvet curtains around the room muffled everything so much that every nearby conversation felt like it was happening right against my ear. After maybe 15 minutes he said the front room was too noisy and asked if I wanted to move somewhere quieter. That alone would have been fine. It was the way he stood up and did not really wait for my answer. He put his hand on the small of my back, not hard, just familiar enough to make it feel rude to step away, and guided me down this dim hallway off to the side of the bar. The carpet changed under my shoes from flat runner to something thicker and softer, and the air got warmer. At the end of the hall there was a room with deep leather booths, lower lighting, and no windows obviously because we were underground. He called it the private overflow room. The words sounded rehearsed. When the door shut behind us, it locked automatically with this heavy magnetic thunk that I felt in my ribs more than I heard. He reached into his pocket and, almost absently, turned over a small black electronic fob in his fingers before slipping it back. I asked if the door always did that, trying to make it sound like a joke. He shrugged and said, "Keeps random people from wandering in." The room smelled even stronger than the main bar. Old whiskey, leather polish, ozone from somewhere nearby, like the electrical panel for the whole basement was on the other side of the wall. I could hear ice shifting in glasses from the other room, but it sounded close and far at the same time. He slid into the booth across from me and smiled in a way that was probably meant to be calming. Then the conversation changed. It didn't happen all at once. He just stopped asking date questions. No more music, movies, neighborhoods, work. He asked whether my roommates were home tonight. He asked if I usually text anyone when I get back from dates. He asked if my parents had my location on my phone, and when I laughed and said no, he asked if anyone did. Friends, siblings, one of those safety apps. He said it lightly, like he was teasing me for being responsible, but my stomach started doing that hollow thing where you feel hungry and sick at the same time. I said something like, "Why are you checking if I'll be missed?" and smiled when I said it because I wanted him to answer with a laugh and make me feel stupid. He smiled back. "Would you?" I remember every sound after that got too distinct. The hum in the wall. The soft scrape of his thumbnail against the glass. Someone dropping silverware in the bar outside. I looked at the door, then at his pocket, then at my phone on the table with one dead little bar of service flickering in and out. The whole room suddenly felt designed, like every soft surface existed to swallow noise. I stood up and said I was sorry, but I wasn't feeling great. I told him I thought maybe the cigar smell was getting to me and I needed to go home. And this is where I still get angry at myself, because for one perfect minute I thought I'd been unfair. His whole face changed. He stood up right away, apologized, said he should have asked before moving us back there, pulled the fob out, unlocked the door and stepped aside without arguing. He even looked embarrassed. On the way up the hallway he kept a polite distance. Back in the main bar he walked me through the room, up the narrow staircase and all the way to the street corner. The cold air outside felt clean enough to drink. Traffic was thin, the deli across the street was still lit, and people were passing often enough that I could hear normal city noise again. He said he hoped I got home safe. He gave a little wave and walked away down the block. I remember standing there under the street lamp feeling almost guilty, like I'd projected something ugly onto a guy who was maybe just awkward and rich and too intense. I opened my rideshare app and waited for it to load. I checked the map. It spun. No cars nearby for 6 minutes. I put my phone in my pocket and reached for my keys because I suddenly wanted the shape of something familiar in my hand, even though I wasn't driving. Instead, my fingers closed around a second object. Smooth plastic, heavier than my keys. I pulled it out and just stared at it because I knew what it was before my brain fully said the words. The black fob. The same one he'd used on the door downstairs. It had a silver sticker on the back with a number scratched into it. I looked up so fast I made myself dizzy. A dark sedan had rolled to the curb in front of me without me hearing it approach. Not a rideshare I recognized. No roof light. Just a dark car with tinted windows and the engine idling low enough to feel more than here. Then both rear doors unlocked at the same time. A mechanical click on either side, clean and synchronized. Nobody got out. Nobody waved. The doors just unlocked. I stepped backward so fast my heel clipped the curb. The storefront behind me was a little boutique that had closed hours earlier, but the display lights were still on, bright enough to throw my reflection back at me in the glass. I could see myself, pale and stiff, and the car behind my shoulder. I grabbed the door handle behind me without even turning around, like maybe if I could get inside a locked store at 1 in the morning some version of the night would start making sense again. It didn't open. Of course it didn't. I kept my hand on it anyway so I had something solid to hold. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't look. The sedan didn't move. A bus went past, then a couple arguing, then a guy walking a dog that stopped to sniff a trash can. I wanted to yell for someone, but every possible sentence sounded insane in my head before it got near my mouth. What was I supposed to say? Don't make eye contact with this sedan because maybe a man from a secret basement bar put a key in my pocket. I told myself it might still be a misunderstanding. Maybe the fob was a joke. Maybe he wanted me to return it. Maybe the car was unrelated. Then the rear door on the passenger side eased open about 3 inches and stopped. That was enough. I pressed myself flat against the window, hard enough that the cold from the glass came through my coat into my shoulder blade. I kept one hand on the locked handle and the other around the fob until the ridged edge bit into my palm. My legs were shaking in these tiny useless waves, not enough to make me collapse, just enough to keep reminding me I was made of muscle and not thought. Once, about 10 minutes in, I tried to walk toward the deli instead. The sedan rolled forward the exact same amount I moved. Not fast, not chasing, just correcting distance like it had all night. So I stopped. I stood there under that white storefront light for what turned into 45 minutes, maybe longer. Long enough for the block to thin out completely. long enough for the sky above the buildings to start going from black to that dusty blue-gray before dawn. Long enough for my fingers to go numb around the handle and for my shoulders to ache from holding still. The car never honked. Nobody came out. It just waited. That was the worst part. Not panic, not violence, just the sense that if I made one cooperative decision, the rest had already been planned for me. When the sedan finally pulled away, it did it slowly, like it had lost interest or run out of time. I stayed where I was even after it turned the corner. I didn't trust the empty street. I didn't trust the morning. When a bakery 2 doors down opened and someone unlocked the gate, I went inside without asking and stood by the bread racks until my rideshare came. I got home after sunrise. I didn't tell my roommates the whole thing. I said the date was weird and I didn't want to talk about it. I put the fob in a plastic bag, then another one, then took it 3 neighborhoods over and dropped it in a public trash can because I couldn't stand having it in the apartment. That afternoon I took the coat I'd worn, the tan-wool one I liked because it made me feel older and more put together, and I shoved it into a black garbage bag and threw that out too. I kept imagining fingers slipping that fob into the pocket while he walked me to the corner, smooth and practiced, like he'd done it before. After that, I stopped letting dates choose the place unless I'd been there already in daylight. I stopped going anywhere underground if I could help it. What I still can't stop thinking about is how polite everything stayed. That's the part that sticks. No threats. No scene. No one grabbing me. Just one more drink, one quieter room, a few more questions, a car opening its doors like it was doing me a favor. And I keep doing the math on it when I don't want to. If I had sat in that private room another 5 minutes, if I'd kept answering because I didn't want to seem rude, if I hadn't said I felt sick when I did, I don't think the sedan would have needed to pull up to the curb at all. I threw the coat away the next morning, but every winter when I reach into a pocket for my keys, I still brace for something smooth and heavy that I know I didn't put there. The worst part about nights like that is how little has to happen for everything to almost happen. You don't always survive because you were smart. Sometimes you survive because your body gets tired before their timing lines up. That's a hard thing to live with. The next story is from someone who did everything right, or at least everything people tell you is right. They drove their own car. They kept an exit. They still ended up somewhere with too much glass and nowhere safe to look. Story 2. The Two-Way Mirror. The moment I knew I had misunderstood the entire weekend, the fire in the wood stove was almost out. It had burned down to those thick red folds that look stable until they collapse in on themselves. The cabin kept making little sounds around us, hot metal settling, wind pressing at the seams, a dry tick from the stovepipe. My date was standing by the big front window, staring out into the dark trees like they were waiting for somebody. The side of their face I could see from the couch was completely blank. No smile, nothing. But in the glass, in the reflection facing me, they were smiling. Not wide, just enough. And what I remember most is that they hadn't blinked in so long I started counting without meaning to. My name's Nolan. I was 42 then, doing freelance compliance consulting for regional health systems, which mostly meant I spent half my week driving from one office park to another in a gray hybrid hatchback and pretending not to live on gas station coffee. I was used to being alone. Honestly, I preferred it most of the time. After a divorce and a couple of relationships that burned out because I was always on the road, solitude had started to feel less like failure and more like decent planning. I met this person on an app and, for a month, they seemed almost aggressively well-adjusted. Smart, funny, emotionally fluent without sounding rehearsed. We had 2 coffee dates in the city that went so well I caught myself doing something I don't usually do anymore, looking ahead. So when they suggested an overnight at a mountain rental, I agreed on one condition. I drove myself. The cabin sat at the end of a private logging road, modern A-frame, black exterior, clean lines, one of those places that looks better in photos than it has any right to. It was early winter, light snow on the ground, nothing serious yet. The host had left the heat on low. The place smelled strongly of industrial pine cleaner, almost enough to mask the older smell underneath of soot and damp wood ash. There was a skylight over the loft that whistled whenever the wind hit it right, a high thin note that kept making me think my ears were ringing. Still, on arrival, everything about the situation lined up with the version of reality I already had. Good connection, nice drive, adult person I liked, one night away, separate cars in the gravel lot. The first wrong note was the duffel bag. Not because bringing a duffel bag to a cabin is strange. Because when they unzipped it, it was packed for 4 days. Groceries, toiletries, extra socks, medication organizer, enough food to supply a small road trip. I even joked about it, asked if they were planning to get snowed in on purpose. They laughed and said they always overpack. I believe that because I've known overpreparers before. My ex once brought an extension cord and a backup kettle to a weekend wedding. People have habits. Habits aren't danger. If anything, I read it as competence. It was easier to file them under meticulous than under alarming. That was my first working explanation. Meticulous. Prepared. Maybe a little intense. I had survived intense before. I had dated controlling people before. I dealt with coworkers who tested boundaries to see if you'd fold. Those situations all had rules. You set a line, you stay calm, you keep your own transportation, you don't drink too much, and if the tone changes you leave. That's what experience teaches you. It teaches you that most bad situations still belong to a category. So I kept going. We cooked together. We opened a bottle of wine. We sat near the stove while the last daylight went blue through the giant front windows. Once the sun went down, those windows turned into black mirrors. From inside, all you could see was the room itself thrown back at you, bright and exposed, with the forest hidden beyond it. It made me mildly uneasy, but not enough to matter. At one point they told a story about growing up in a small town and said, almost in passing, I get why you stopped sleeping with your bedroom door closed after what happened when you were 8. I didn't answer right away because I genuinely thought I'd misheard them. That thing when I was 8 was not in my profile. It was not something I'd ever told them. It wasn't even the kind of event you'd hint at for sympathy. It had come up once, years ago, in a therapy intake form, and once more in a late-night conversation with my ex-wife after a storm knocked power out in our building. That's it. Even now, I don't want to say exactly what it was. Just that it involved a locked room, a family member, and a period of time I don't remember cleanly. My date said it casually, like they were referencing my favorite movie. I asked where they'd heard that. They looked confused for half a second, then said, You mentioned it. I knew I hadn't. I also knew memory gets sloppy around old pain, and I could feel myself reaching for the familiar frame again. Oversharer. Maybe I'd said more than I remembered. Maybe one of those long app conversations had blurred together. Maybe they'd picked up on something and were bluffing intimacy. That happens too. Manipulative people mirror depth to accelerate closeness. Ugly but legible. Later, I went out to my car to get my toiletry bag and check the charge level because mountain weather makes me fussy about range. The snow had gotten thicker, dry little grains hitting my coat sleeve and melting into dark pinpoints. My car was where I'd left it, but the charging cable I'd plugged into the exterior outlet by the deck had been cut clean through. Not torn, not chewed, severed. The copper ends were neat and bright in the porch light. I stood there too long, keys in my hand, breathing into air that smelled like cold dirt and gasoline from the generator shed. I remember thinking very clearly, okay, that's not controlling. That's sabotage. And even then, I didn't jump to the biggest possibility. I thought maybe they'd panicked about my leaving after the awkward comment and done something stupid and theatrical. Something fixable. Something still inside a category I recognized. When I came back in, the cabin felt warmer than before, unpleasantly warm, almost damp. Both our phones were on the kitchen counter side by side, screens lit. Mine had been in my coat pocket when I'd stepped outside. They were standing there with one hand resting on the granite, not hiding anything. I said, Did you go through my coat? They said, You used the same 6 digits for more things than you should. I knew exactly what they meant because my phone was unlocked. Open. Not guessed it by accident, not a lucky try. Open. And what hit me then wasn't just fear. It was this hollow collapse in my chest. Like I had been building explanations out of sturdy materials and suddenly discovered they were all cardboard. I crossed the room and picked up my phone. My hands were steady, but only because they had gone so cold they felt borrowed. Recent messages open. Notes app open. Photos. Not everything, but enough to say choice had been exercised. I asked why they cut my cable. And this is where the inversion happened, even if I didn't have that word for it then. Because I thought the answer was going to confirm my model. Isolation. Control. Prevent me from leaving tonight. Instead they looked at me almost kindly and said, I didn't disable your car to keep you from leaving now. I did it so you wouldn't have options tomorrow. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because my body had nowhere else to put the shock. They kept talking in the same measured voice. Tomorrow we were supposed to ride back together in their vehicle. It would be easier that way, they said. Cleaner. More efficient. Then they said something I still hear sometimes when I wake up too early. I already sublet your apartment 2 days ago. I just stared at them. They went on like we were discussing logistics. The person moving in had short-term flexibility. They'd agreed on cash. My lease was easy to exploit because of the management portal's weak password reset. There were boxes already in place. They said it all with this bizarre confidence that made it sound less like a threat and more like an itinerary I had forgotten approving. Not loud. Not angry. Calm enough that for one insane second I wondered if there had been some massive financial mistake I hadn't noticed. Some fraud so thorough it had become reality without my participation. Then they said my downstairs neighbor situation was taken care of too. You won't be alone there. That stripped the last bit of false structure out of me. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten to call the police because both our phones were there and I no longer understood the scale of what they had access to. I picked up my keys from the table and backed toward the door without taking my eyes off them. My throat had gone tight in a way that made swallowing noisy. My pulse was punching so hard at the base of my neck that it hurt. They didn't lunge. They didn't block me. They just said, if you leave now, you'll make this messier than it has to be. That line, more than anything else, told me I was not in a fight. I was in the middle of somebody else's plan. Outside, the snow came down harder. My car still had battery. Not much, but enough. I got in, locked the doors, and drove with the heat off to preserve range. The logging road was barely a road, just rutted dirt with a skim of ice and pine branches crowding the edges. I kept expecting headlights in my rear view or a hand on the passenger window at a stop, but nothing came. The only sound was the electric motor whining soft and the wipers dragging slush across the glass. 6 miles doesn't sound like much until you're measuring them against a dying battery in the middle of black trees with no service and no houses. Every curve felt like the final one my car would not make. When I hit paved highway, the relief didn't feel like relief. It felt like borrowed time. I flagged down a county plow truck by stepping into the edge of the lane and waving both arms. The driver rolled his window down 2 inches and looked at me the way people look at someone they think might be drunk or concussed. I said enough to get him to let me sit in the cab and call state police from his radio. By the time anybody went up to the cabin, it was empty. Rental company claimed the reservation details had been falsified. The name I knew was fake. The profile photos vanished. The app account was gone by morning. I changed every password I had. Then I changed them again. I had the locks replaced on my apartment door and the little storage closet off the balcony because suddenly I hated that it had ever had a separate key. Management denied any sublet activity. No one was officially placed in my unit. No one admitted access. But in the weeks after, things started shifting. A mug left one cabinet over. My bathroom scissors turned points up instead of down. A receipt from the grocery store flattened on the counter when I knew I'd crumpled it in my coat. Small stuff, inch-level stuff, the kind of thing you can lose your mind trying to prove. I installed cameras, but nothing ever showed more than me moving around my own rooms, tired and suspicious. The part one still don't have a category for is the apartment below mine. There had been turnover there right around the same time. New tenant management said, quiet guy, kept to himself. I saw him twice in the first month, once carrying a lamp, once checking his mailbox with no mail in it. Both times he smiled too early, before I was really close enough to require it. He has never made noise. He has never had visible guests. And some nights, when I come home late from a consulting trip and sit in my parked hybrid listening to the cooling engine tick, I can see a slice of his front room through the gap in the curtains. No television on. No lamp. Just the blue-white glow of a phone held upright for a very long time. I used to think experience kept you safe because it taught you the shape of danger. What that weekend taught me is that some people survive their own bad ideas long enough to get very organized. You tell yourself a story about what kind of threat you're dealing with because categories create exits. Stalker, controller, fraud. I did that all the way up the mountain. I did it in the kitchen while my unlocked phone sat beside theirs. I did it until the moment I understood I wasn't being trapped inside a bad date. I was being introduced to a system already in motion. And I still don't know if the man downstairs rents that apartment, or if he's just there on behalf of someone who once smiled at me from a dark window without blinking. I still drive my own car to every first meeting. I still keep my keys in my front pocket. None of that feels like control anymore. Feels like ritual. There are certain kinds of fear that don't arrive when the thing happens. They arrive later when you realize how far back the planning started. That's what the next story reminds me of. Not a cabin, not a mountain, just a bright empty lobby and a clock doing simple math while somebody else decides how much time is left. Story 3. The locked lobby. If you've ever yanked on a door hard enough to hear the hinges complain, you know the sound it makes when your body still thinks force is an argument. That was me at exactly 11 at night in the lobby of a downtown high-rise, both hands on the brass pull of the front entrance, planting my shoes on polished stone and hauling backward like there might be some trick to it I hadn't found yet. The glass flexed, the metal groaned, and nothing opened. Behind me, across all that empty marble and bright white light, the elevator display changed from 14 to 13, then 12. My date was supposedly the only person left in the building, and the elevator was coming down by itself. My name's Dev. I was 31, working long hours in medical billing, and I was one of those people who always checked exits the minute I walked into a place. I don't say that to make myself sound paranoid. It's just habit. Hotels, theaters, conference centers, I clocked the doors without thinking. That night I was meeting someone who said they had to finish one quick file at their accounting firm before dinner. Prestigious building, serious job, late night grind. I tracked. They buzzed me into the lobby just before 10. The security guard swiped me through the waist-high gates, and I got told to wait on a leather couch near the desk for 20 minutes. Big marble floor, expensive abstract art, HVAC humming so loud it flattened the space. At 10:30 on the dot, the guard packed up his thermos, zipped his jacket, locked the security desk, and walked out the front doors. Didn't say shift change, didn't say night guys late, didn't say anything to me at all. I noticed it because I notice procedures. But I also know office buildings run on rigid schedules. So I checked the wall clock, saw the second hand moving cleanly, and assumed the next guard was grabbing coffee or in the restroom upstairs. Irritating, not alarming. People get sloppy when they think a lobby camera is doing half their job anyway. I told myself I had seen weirder things in hospitals at 3 in the morning. A missing guard is not a crisis if there are cameras, badge logs, and a staffed office upstairs. I even moved from the couch to the center seating area because the vent by the door was blowing cold air down my neck. The place smelled like floor wax and something electrical, that dry hot scent server rooms leak into a hallway. Too bright to feel threatening. Too open to feel dangerous. That was the logic. A bad setup, maybe. Not danger. Then my phone buzzed. Coming down in 20 minutes. Don't let anyone in. No greeting. No apology. Just that. I stared at it longer than I should have. It was odd, sure, but I worked with enough high-strung professionals to know some people flatten into commands when they're stressed. Maybe confidential file. Maybe a client mess. Maybe they were joking. I texted back. The guard left. No reply. I got up and walked the perimeter of the lobby. Habit. Assessment. The front doors were still locked from the outside but should have opened from inside. They didn't. I tried the side stairwell fire exit next, the one behind a brushed steel push bar. It had a chain looped through the handles from the inside, thick hardware store chain with a heavy padlock hanging at waist height. That is not legal, and I knew it instantly. I touched the lock to be sure my eyes weren't doing some distance trick. Cold steel. Real weight. I felt my chest tighten then. Not panic, just a hard narrowing. The lobby suddenly seemed too large. No columns, no plants, no reception furniture high enough to hide behind. Just polished stone and reflective surfaces. My shoes squeaked when I turned. I texted again. Why is the fire exit chained shut? Nothing. 10 minutes passed in pieces. HVAC drone. Elevator idle. The digital clock over the security desk clicking from 37 to 38. At 10:40, another text came. Coming down in 10 minutes. Stand exactly in the center of the room. That is the moment rational explanation ended. Not because the sentence was dramatic. Because it wasn't. It was specific in a way that meant thought had gone into the geometry of the space. I looked up at the camera in the corner near the revolving doors. Small black dome, red light steady. I moved toward the wall instead, close enough to the glass that I could see my own reflection laid over the dark street outside. Empty block. No pedestrians. A bus going by half full. Nobody looking in. I called. Straight to voicemail. I called building management. After hours line, endless ringing, then a recording. I shouted toward the elevator bank, loud enough that the sound came back at me thin and useless. No answer. The hum from the vents swallowed everything below a shout. My hands were dry, then suddenly slick. I wiped them on my pants and realized I could feel my pulse in each fingertip. At 2 minutes to 11, the elevator indicator lit up. 14, 13, 12. I backed toward the front doors and grabbed one of the brass stanchions used for queue lines during business hours. Heavy base, velvet rope still clipped to it. It came free with a soft metallic scrape across the stone. The elevator kept descending. 11, 10, 9. My phone buzzed again right as the indicator hit 1. I looked because not looking had already stopped helping. I like how you look when you're trapped. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. Empty. Not empty in a normal way either. No briefcase on the floor, no cleaning cart, no person pressed in the corner. Just fluorescent light, brushed steel walls, and my own warped reflection in the back panel. I looked up at the security camera and, as if it had been waiting for me to understand the connection, the red recording light blinked twice. Same rhythm as the vibration that had just gone through my hand from the text message. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 3 seconds, maybe 10. Long enough for the elevator doors to stay open, as if inviting me closer. Long enough for the air from inside the car to reach me. It smelled colder than the lobby, like metal and dust and somebody else's cologne fading out of fabric. Then I heard it. Not from the elevator. From somewhere above. A single footstep on marble, softened by distance and by the HVAC drone, but unmistakable because I had been listening for anything human for half an hour. That's when my body overruled my training. Not completely, just enough to choose motion over analysis. I swung the stanchion into the front glass door as hard as I could. The first hit starred the panel but didn't break it. The sound cracked through the lobby so sharply my ears rang. I hit it again. Then once more, using both hands, my shoulders and back and all the adrenaline my body had been saving. The tempered glass exploded outward in a rain of bright cubes. Cold air rushed in across the floor. Somewhere behind me the elevator doors started to slide shut. I dropped the stanchion and ran through the broken panel, catching my sleeve on the jagged edge of the frame hard enough to tear it. I didn't look back until I hit the sidewalk. When I did, the lobby was still bright and empty. The elevator doors were closed. From the outside, through the shattered entrance, the space looked like a showroom after hours. No movement, no figure stepping into view, just that impossible clean emptiness. I kept running anyway, straight down the block until I saw a convenience store with 3 people inside and a man restocking refrigerators near the door. I must have looked bad because the cashier came around the counter before I even got words out. Police came. Building management came. My dates numbered disconnected before midnight. The company name they had given me checked out as real, but they did not work there. Security footage from the lobby after 10:30 was unavailable due to what management called a recording interruption. The chained fire exit got written up as a maintenance issue. The guard who left early supposedly didn't exist on the staffing roster for that address. I can still enter buildings. I have to. Life doesn't really care what happened to you. But now the center of any room feels wrong in my body. Conference halls, hotel atriums, even somebody's oversized living room. I step in and immediately map the nearest window, the fastest door, the heaviest object I could swing if I had to. People think it's anxiety. Maybe it is. All I know is that a room gets different once you've been told exactly where to stand in it. And I keep coming back to the part that makes the least sense. Not why they trapped me. I understand enough about cruelty to know not every act has a satisfying motive. What I don't understand is why that building. They didn't work there. They didn't know me. They picked a corporate lobby that went functionally dead after hours, told me to wait, and started closing options around me like it was the simplest use in the world for an empty room and a stranger who said yes to dinner. That's what I can't shake. Not hatred. Not obsession. Just convenience. I don't stand in the middle of rooms anymore, and I don't wait in empty lobbies for anybody, no matter how legitimate the badge or the office or the excuse sounds. People like to imagine danger announces itself with some big dramatic tell. Most of the time it's a text message that lands in a well-lit place and asks for one small obedient thing. By the time you know what kind of person would ask, you're already counting doors. The last story starts where most people would think it should end, inside a car with the engine running, looking at a diner window and realizing the conversation at the table and the conversation on the phone cannot both be true. Story 4. Table for 3. I was in my car with the doors locked, wipers knocking back and forth through a sheet of rain, staring at the diner window like if I watched long enough one version of what I was seeing would correct the other. Inside, under all that clean yellow light, my date was sitting in a booth by the front windows. The waitress was leaning in over the table, laughing. Then she slid into the booth beside them like they had known each other for years, and I watched my date take her hand for a second and squeeze it. At that exact moment my phone buzzed in the cup holder with a text from my date that said, "Can you believe how rude this waitress is being to me?" I read it twice before I even looked up again. My name's Mara. I was 56 then, widowed a long time, retired from municipal payroll, and a lot more comfortable alone than most people find polite to admit. I kept my phone battery over 80% the way some people carry Lucky Charms. Charged battery, full tank, decent shoes. Small habits that make leaving easy. I had matched with someone a few weeks earlier who seemed kind in a low-pressure way. They worked second shift at a local hospital, or so they said, and because our schedules never lined up earlier, they asked if I'd meet them at a diner just off the interstate after midnight. It wasn't romantic, but it felt practical. I liked practical. By the time things became clear, I was already backing out of the lot in reverse, trying not to make the tires spin in the rain. But the reason it frightened me later, the part that stayed, was how normal the first 2 hours had been. When I got there, just after 1 in the morning, the diner looked exactly like every interstate diner you've ever seen. Chrome trim, red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner playing old songs a little too softly, and that smell of burnt coffee soaked into everything with bleach laid over the top of it. The windows were big and bright to people outside, but the booth backs inside were high enough that once you sat down, you couldn't see who was behind you unless you stood. My date was already there, waving from a booth halfway down the room. Nice smile. Tired eyes. Hospital scrubs under a coat. We ordered coffee and eggs because it felt silly to meet at a diner and not. The first odd thing was the waitress calling them by a nickname. Not their profile name, not a shortened version that made obvious sense. Something softer and more familiar. She playfully swatted their shoulder with her notepad when she took the order. My date rolled their eyes and said, "Don't start. I read that the best possible way because that is what I do. Small town. Regular customer. Friendly waitress. End of story." I remember even feeling relieved. Familiarity makes a place feel safe when you're meeting someone new. Conversation went easily. That's important, because otherwise I'd have dismissed the whole night sooner as a bad setup. We talked about boring adult things in a satisfying way. Insurance headaches. Aging parents. Why grocery stores always rearrange one aisle too many at a time. They asked decent questions and actually listened to the answers. When I mentioned I liked driving late because traffic thinned out and my battery was always charged anyway, they smiled and said, "Prepared. I like that." That line bothered me later. At the time it felt flattering. Sometime after 2:30, They excused themselves to the restroom and left their phone face up on the table. I wasn't snooping. It lit up in front of me. Just one line on the screen from a number with no name attached. Stall them for 20 more minutes. I remember the exact shape of my own thought then because it embarrasses me now. I assumed it was about work. Hospital people swap shifts, ask favors, run behind. Maybe somebody needed coverage and had terrible boundaries. I told myself not to be the kind of person who reads one text and builds a whole melodrama around it. Still, my coffee had gone sour in my mouth. Tasted burnt enough to feel gritty. I reached for my purse strap with one hand, just to have it looped over my wrist. When the waitress came by, I asked for the check. She smiled too fast and said pie was on the house. Peach fresh that night. Before I could answer, she set another cup down in front of me and topped off my coffee, leaning in just enough that her body blocked the aisle out of the booth. The bleach smell on her uniform was so sharp it cut through the food smell. I said that was nice, but I really did need the bill. She put one hand on the back of the booth and said, "They're almost done, honey. No point rushing out in this weather." Again, I found the generous explanation because that is the groove my mind wears naturally. She's trying to be kind. She's overfamiliar. She wants a bigger check total. Pick one. None of that is danger. And if I made a fuss and turned out to be wrong, then I was just a tired woman in a diner inventing drama because a waitress offered free pie. So I smiled. I waited. I listened to silverware clatter in the kitchen and the rain drumming the windows in uneven bursts. A minute later the bell over the front door rang and a man in a heavy work coat came in. Big coat, dark with rain at the shoulders, cap pulled low. He didn't stop at the host's stand. Didn't look around for a menu. He walked straight down the aisle and slid into the booth directly behind me. Not beside me, not one over. Right behind me. The vinyl backrest flexed when he sat. A second later I felt his knee press into it from the other side, hard enough to nudge me forward an inch. That finally started to puncture the good faith reading I'd been living in. My date returned from the restroom and sat down like nothing was wrong. I asked lightly if they knew the guy behind us. They said, "Should I?" and smiled like I was being funny. Their phone was back in their hand before I could glance at it again. The waitress drifted to the end of the aisle and stayed there talking to nobody, polishing clean silverware with a rag that looked already wet. I wanted to leave then. I really did. But leaving a booth involves choreography. Purse, coat, legs sideways. Excuse me. And I hated that my own politeness was still in the room with me, telling me not to overreact until something was definite. So I went looking for definite. I dropped my napkin on purpose and bent to pick it up. From under the table, the whole scene changed. I could see the waitress's shoes at the end of the aisle, white soles planted wide. I could see the dark cuff of the man's coat where he sat behind me. And I could see my date not looking at me, looking past me. The waitress lifted her hand at hip height and held up 3 fingers. Not casual. Not scratching her face or adjusting hair. 3 fingers, still and visible. My date looked at her and gave the smallest nod I've ever seen. The kind of movement you would never notice unless you were already underneath the table staring at strangers' knees. That was the moment the earlier pieces rearranged themselves. The nickname, the free pie, the text message, the knee in the booth. All of it suddenly on one string. I came back up too fast and hit my head on the table edge. My date asked if I was okay in this soft, concerned voice that would have worked on me 10 minutes earlier. I could feel my heartbeat in the center of my chest like somebody knocking from inside. Not fast exactly. Hard. Deliberate. My mouth had gone dry enough that my tongue stuck slightly to the roof when I said I thought I left my inhaler in the car. I do not have asthma. That detail didn't matter. What mattered was that it was a reason to stand up alone and come back, which meant a reason to leave without naming fear. My date started to rise with me, maybe to offer to help, maybe for something else. I put a 20 on the table so fast it half slid into the syrup caddy and said, "No, stay there. I'll be 2 seconds." I smiled when I said it. That part still makes me ill that I smiled. The waitress took 1 step into the aisle as I slid out. "Honey, your pie's coming," I said. "Then save it." I walked, not ran, because people notice running. The floor felt slick under my shoes from tracked-in rain. Every sound in the diner came up too clearly. Fryer hiss from the kitchen. Jukebox click between songs. My date behind me saying my name once, then again, louder with an edge under it. I did not turn around. The cold air hit my face when I pushed through the front door, and only then did I realize my hands were shaking hard enough that my keys scraped the car paint before I got the fob right. Inside the car, with the engine on and the doors locked, I looked back through the rain-streaked windshield and saw the scene I told you at the beginning. My date in the booth, the waitress beside them, their hands touching, familiar, unhurried. Then my phone lit with that text about the rude waitress. For a second my mind did this desperate split where it tried to preserve some innocent version. Joke, misfire, weird misunderstanding. But from the booth behind them, the man in the heavy coat stood up and leaned slightly into the aisle, just enough to watch the parking lot through the glass. I put the car in reverse and left. My date called once before I hit the interstate. I let it ring, then 3 more times. Then a text that said, "You forgot your change." Then another that said, "You don't need to be embarrassed." Then nothing. I deleted the app before I got home. Deleted the messages. Deleted the account. In the morning, with daylight on everything, I thought about how many times I had walked myself back from suspicion because each individual thing could be explained. That's what really frightened me later. Not the signal under the table. Not even the text. It was how easy it had been to keep supplying nice reasons for people who were very plainly coordinating around me. I haven't used a dating app since. I won't sit in a restaurant booth if I can't see the front door. If a server blocks the aisle too long while talking, my whole body goes alert before my mind catches up. Friends say that sounds extreme. Maybe it does. They didn't feel another person's knee press through a shared vinyl back while a waitress counted time with her fingers. And the question that keeps returning isn't even whether I was in immediate danger. I think I was. I think the answer to that is yes. What I can't stop wondering is scope. How many other people sat in that exact booth after midnight and got kept there just a little longer by coffee, by weather, by politeness, by a phone lighting up at the wrong moment? How many times did that waitress call somebody sweetheart while buying 20 more minutes for the person in the heavy coat to settle in behind them? I still drive past that exit sometimes on longer trips, and no matter what hour it is, the diner lot is never quite empty. There is almost always one car near the window, engine running, as if somebody has only just realized there are too many people inside who already know each other.